Hey guys, tonight we are easing ourselves into the warm, dusty world of ancient Egypt. Picture this. You're standing by the banks of the Nile. The sun is beating down. The air is thick with the smell of river mud and drying reeds. It's beautiful, yes, but also buzzing, literally, around your head, around your ankles, on every surface. It's hot, it's humid, and frankly, you probably wouldn't survive a week out here without modern bug spray, screens, and maybe an industrial fan. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, if you're drifting off, let me know where you are and what time it is in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you settle down, imagine that dry, warm air settling over you. Feel the texture of rough linen against your skin. You're standing outside your simple home, a structure made primarily of sun-baked mud brick. Sounds idyllic, doesn't it? A simple life by the life-giving river. And it was, in many ways. But that same life-giving river, the one that provided the fertile soil for your crops, the water for your drinking, and the transport route for goods, also brought with it an endless, relentless parade of tiny, often irritating, and sometimes downright dangerous creatures. Pests. Think about the environment. The Nile floods annually, right? This was absolutely essential for agriculture, depositing that rich black silt that made the land so incredibly fertile. But all that standing water, all that lush vegetation that springs up afterwards, it's a five-star resort for insects. Mosquitoes, flies, gnats, oh, the gnats. You can practically feel them swarming around your face, trying to get into your eyes, your ears, your mouth. You wave your hand swatting them away, but there are always more. It's a constant background hum to ancient Egyptian life, like a static that never turns off. Trying to enjoy a quiet evening under the stars? Good luck! You'll be sharing it with hundreds of tiny, unwelcome guests. Then there are the larger scuttling things. Cockroaches, beetles of all shapes and sizes. They love the warmth, they love the damp spots, they love any little crumb you might have dropped. You open a storage jar and there's a beetle looking back at you. You walk across the floor at night and you hear that faint, unsettling skittering sound. You probably just try not to think about it too much, but it's always there, on the periphery of your awareness. And it wasn't just about annoyance. These pests carried diseases. Mosquitoes, for example, were almost certainly responsible for spreading malaria, which would have been a major health problem. You'd feel the fever, the chills, the weakness, and you'd know it was from those tiny buzzing things that bit you in the night. There was no understanding of germ theory, of course, no microscopic culprits, just the obvious irritant, the bite itself, which must have seemed almost like a curse in itself. Flies landed on everything, your food, your face, open wounds. We know the ancient Egyptians were pretty meticulous about cleanliness by the standards of the time, but fly control, that was a monumental task. Imagine trying to keep food covered in a world without cling film or even effective netting. You'd prepare a meal, and within minutes it would be covered in flies. You'd just have to keep shooing them away, constantly. It's a level of persistence that makes modern life feel incredibly easy by comparison. Trying to nap? Forget it, unless you had someone standing over you with a fly whisk, and even then, some would get through. One mainstream historical fact is that the annual Nile inundation, while crucial for agriculture, also facilitated the spread of waterborne diseases and insect populations because of the large areas of standing or slow-moving water it left behind. It was the lifeblood of the civilization, but it came with strings attached, or perhaps with legs and wings. A quirky little tidbit is just how many specific insects they observed and categorized. They had hieroglyphs for different types of flies, beetles, and other creepy crawlies. They saw them, they named them, they dealt with them. It's a testament to the sheer number and variety of pests that shared their world that they felt the need to linguistically differentiate between them. Like, oh, not that kind of beetle, the other kind that eats the grain, not the one that just sits there looking shiny. Historians still argue whether certain ancient texts describing illnesses are referring to specific diseases like malaria or schistosomiasis, which were definitely spread by pests or waterborne parasites common in the Nile Valley environment. The descriptions are often vague enough that pinning down the exact historical impact of certain diseases is difficult. You step inside your mud brick home, perhaps hoping for a little respite from the buzzing hordes outside. The walls, made of sun-dried bricks mixed with straw, feel solid enough, but they're far from airtight. There are cracks, small gaps, imperfections here and there. The roof, likely constructed from bundled reeds or palm logs covered in mud, provides shade and keeps out the worst of the rain, when it rarely comes, but it's a welcoming highway and nesting ground for all sorts of small creatures. So while you've left the open-air swarm, you've entered a different kind of ecosystem, one that has already moved in and made itself quite comfortable. Let's talk about the floor. It's likely packed earth, maybe covered with reed mats. Easy to sweep, but also a lovely habitat for things that like to scurry close to the ground. As evening falls and the light fades, you might start to see them. The cockroaches. Not just one or two, but likely many. They emerge from crevices you didn't even know were there, bold and unafraid. They'll explore the corners, investigate any dropped crumbs, and generally make their presence known with that distinct, unsettling, scuttling sound. Trying to walk across the room in the dark becomes a cautious maneuver, lest you step on something crunchy. Lovely. Then there are the ants. Oh, the ants. You leave out a piece of fruit, a date, anything remotely edible, and within what feels like seconds, a scout has found it, and a tiny, determined trail is forming across the floor, up the wall, heading straight for your treat. They are relentless. You try sweeping them away, maybe pouring a little water on the trail, but they simply regroup and find a new path. They get into your food storage, baskets, pottery jars. You lift the lid and there they are, a busy, unwelcome colony harvesting your supper. It's a constant battle just to protect your precious calories from these tiny, organized armies. But perhaps the most intimate and certainly the most irritating indoor pest was the bed bug. Yes, they've been around for that long. You settle down on your mat or simple bed frame after a long day, and just as you're starting to relax, you feel it and itch. Then another. These tiny vampires hide in the cracks of furniture, in bedding, in the walls themselves, emerging at night to feed on your blood. Their bites are maddeningly itchy, disrupting your sleep and leaving you covered in red welts. There's no easy way to get rid of them. You can beat your mats, try to clean crevices, but they are incredibly persistent. Sharing your bed with hundreds of tiny, biting passengers, just another Tuesday in ancient Egypt. Makes you appreciate a clean mattress and fitted sheets, doesn't it? Fleas and lice were also common house guests, usually hitching a ride on humans or their domesticated animals, like those cats we'll talk about later. Keeping clean was important, and the Egyptians were known for their personal hygiene routines, including shaving heads and bodies to reduce places for lice to hide. But even with best efforts, these external parasites were a constant nuisance, causing intense itching and discomfort. Imagine trying to concentrate on grinding grain or weaving cloth while constantly scratching. It was just part of the background noise of life. And the flies. The house flies weren't just outside, they came inside too, seeking shade and attracted by food and human presence. They'd land on everything, your food as you ate it, your face as you tried to rest, even open wounds. There was no escape. Swatting was the primary defense, but for every fly you shoot away, two more seemed to take its place. It was a never-ending aerial assault, tiny, buzzing nuisances that made it hard to find peace even within the walls of your own home. Beetles of various sorts also found their way inside. Some were harmless, just little dark shapes scurrying across the floor. Others, like certain grain beetles, were far more destructive, getting into stored food and ruining supplies. You find them in your barley, your lentils, your dried figs. Picking them out was tedious and often impossible to do completely. You just accepted that you were sharing your meals, whether you liked it or not. One mainstream historical fact about ancient Egyptian homes is that they were typically constructed from mud brick, which was readily available from the Nile mud. While effective at insulating against heat, this material was porous and prone to cracking, providing numerous entry points and hiding places for insects and rodents. It was a fundamental part of their architecture that inherently created challenges for pest control. A quirky tidbit, some of the beetles they encountered might have been scarab beetles, which, while revered symbolically, were still just insects that could get into things. The line between sacred symbol and annoying bug was probably quite thin when you found one crawling in your breadbasket. It's a funny thought, worshipping a beetle, then having to flick its cousin out of your breakfast.
All right, so you've accepted that your home is a bustling metropolis for various crawling things. Now let's step back outside into the bright sun and humid air, where a different kind of pest launches its aerial assault, the biting flies. We're not just talking about house flies landing on your picnic. These are the ones that deliver a sharp, painful bite. Think horse flies, stable flies, maybe even sand flies in certain areas. They seem specifically designed to interrupt any moment of peace you might find. Picture yourself working in the fields, maybe tending to your barley crop or irrigating a patch of flax. You're already hot, sweaty, and tired. And then the flies descend. They land on your exposed skin, your arms, your legs, your neck, and their bite isn't just irritating, it hurts. You slap at them, wave your hands, but they are persistent. They buzz around your face, trying to get into your eyes and mouth, attracted by sweat and moisture. It's a constant distraction, making already difficult manual labor even more miserable. How did they cope? Swatting was, of course, the most immediate and instinctive defense. You can almost see the depictions in tomb paintings, people working and casually flicking insects away. But a hand can only cover so much area, and there are always more flies. Fly whisks, often made from animal tails or bundles of reeds, became essential tools. You'd carry one with you, using it to constantly sweep the air around you, creating a small, temporary zone of relative fly-free space. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. Imagine the rhythmic swish-swish of fly whisks being a constant sound in public spaces. Beyond physical defense, did they have repellents? This is where things get a bit more interesting. We know the Egyptians used various oils and unguents on their skin, primarily for cosmetic purposes, to keep skin supple in the dry heat, and perhaps for religious reasons. Some of these might have offered a side benefit of deterring insects. For example, certain scented oils, if they contained ingredients disliked by flies, could have provided some mild protection. We see depictions of people wearing cones of scented fat on their heads at banquets. These would melt in the heat, releasing perfume. Perhaps this wasn't just for smelling nice. Maybe it helped keep the flying annoyances at bay during a feast. A rather elegant, if messy, form of bug repellent. Another method might have involved creating smoky fires. Certain types of wood or plant material, when burned, produce smoke that repels insects. This would be more practical outdoors or in well-ventilated areas. Imagine sitting outside your home in the evening, a small smoky fire burning nearby, hoping the fumes would keep the worst of the mosquitoes and biting flies away. The air would be thick with smoke, but maybe, just maybe, you could enjoy a few moments without constant buzzing. Trapping was also a possibility, though evidence is sparser for widespread use against biting flies specifically. Sticky substances like tree resin or honey could potentially be used to create simple traps. You'd place a dish of something attractive to flies, though perhaps less attractive than you, and surround it with a sticky barrier. This might catch some, but given the sheer numbers, it feels like a drop in the ocean. Still, every little bit helped. One mainstream historical fact is that depictions in tomb paintings and artifacts clearly show the use of fly whisks by people from all levels of society, indicating that dealing with flies was a universal challenge. From pharaohs to farmers, everyone was waving something around to keep the flies away. A quirky tidbit, there are theories that some of the elaborate collars or broad necklaces worn by Egyptians, particularly the wealthy, weren't just decorative. Made of beads, faience, or metal, their width meant they covered a large area of the neck and upper chest, which are common targets for biting insects. Could they have offered a degree of physical protection? It's a fascinating, if unproven, idea. Looking good while avoiding bites. Multitasking at its finest. Historians still argue whether certain ingredients found in ancient Egyptian medical texts or cosmetic recipes were included specifically for their insect repellent properties, or if any deterrent effect was merely a happy accident of using fragrant or oily substances. Pinning down the exact purpose of every ingredient in ancient recipes is notoriously difficult without explicit descriptions of their intended use for pest control. Think about the livestock. Cattle, sheep, goats, they would have been absolutely covered in flies. This wouldn't just make the animals uncomfortable, it would affect their health, their ability to graze properly, and ultimately the productivity of the farm. Protecting the animals from biting insects was just as important as protecting yourself. You'd likely spend time shooing flies off your most valuable animals, maybe even.
While the buzzing and scuttling pests were a daily annoyance, the ancient Egyptians also had to contend with creatures that posed a more immediate and serious threat: scorpions and spiders. These aren't just creepy crawlies. Many species found in Egypt could deliver a venomous sting or bite, causing intense pain, severe illness, and in some cases even death. Unlike the flies you could swat away or the ants you could sweep, you really didn't want to mess with these. Imagine living in a home with mud brick walls and packed earth floors, perhaps with reed mats. These structures, while offering shelter, also provided countless nooks, crannies, and dark corners perfect for scorpions and spiders to hide during the heat of the day. You'd be particularly wary of putting your hand into a storage jar or stepping onto the floor in the dark, or reaching under a mat. Every shaded spot, every pile of textiles, every crack in the wall could potentially harbor something venomous. Scorpions were a particular concern. Several species, including the highly venomous deathstalker scorpion, were common in the region. Their stings are incredibly painful and can be lethal, especially to children or the elderly. Finding a scorpion inside your home would have been a terrifying event. There was no antivenom readily available. Your best hope was likely to kill the creature and perhaps try some traditional remedies, but the outcome was uncertain. You'd constantly be checking corners, shaking out sandals before putting them on, a timeless piece of advice for anyone in scorpion territory then and now, and being generally cautious about where you placed your hands and feet. Spiders, too, posed a threat, though perhaps less universally feared than scorpions. While many spider bites are harmless or just mildly irritating, some species, like the Mediterranean recluse spider, have venom that can cause nasty wounds. Again, their preferred habitat was often the same dark, undisturbed corners of human dwellings. You'd see webs in the rafters, in storage areas, and while most spiders are beneficial predators of other insects, a small comfort when you're worried about a bite, the risk of encountering a dangerous one was real. How did they deal with these more dangerous intruders? Prevention was key, though difficult in their building style. Keeping homes as clean and tidy as possible would help reduce hiding places, but you couldn't eliminate them entirely. Shaking out textiles, checking storage containers, and being careful when moving things were likely common practices born of necessity. They also relied on identifying and killing the creatures. If you saw a scorpion or a dangerous spider, you'd try to dispatch it carefully, likely with a stick or a stone. You wouldn't want to get too close. This required vigilance and a certain bravery, as a misstep could be disastrous. There's also the possibility of using barriers, though simple mud brick doesn't offer much defense. Perhaps wealthier homes had better plastered walls or flooring that reduced cracks. But for the average person, their home was essentially open to anything small enough to crawl through a gap. One mainstream historical fact is that scorpions were such a recognized threat that they appear in Egyptian art and religion, sometimes as malevolent forces to be protected against, or conversely, associated with protective deities like Serket, the goddess of scorpions and magic who could potentially heal stings. A quirky tidbit involves scorpion charms. Egyptians wore amulets and carried charms depicting deities or symbols believed to offer protection against scorpion stings and snake bites. It wasn't just practical measures, they also appealed to the supernatural realm for safety from these venomous creatures. Imagine carefully placing a small amulet by your sleeping mat, hoping it would ward off any scuttling dangers in the night. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of ancient medical treatments for scorpion stings or spider bites stemmed from actual medicinal properties of the ingredients used, like poultices or ingested substances, or was primarily due to the placebo effect or simply basic wound care. The ancient texts describe various remedies, but separating genuine efficacy from folk belief is challenging for modern science. Think about the fear factor. It's one thing to be annoyed by flies, another entirely to live with the constant low-level anxiety of encountering something that could seriously harm or kill you. Checking your children's sleeping area, looking inside their shoes, if they even had them, these would have been ingrained habits. The darkness of night would bring heightened awareness. Every rustle, every faint sound could be a potential threat. The Egyptians had a profound connection to their environment, understanding its rhythms and dangers. They knew the habits of these creatures.
All right, we've covered the buzzing, the crawling, and the potentially deadly things lurking in the corners. Now let's talk about the invaders who weren't interested in biting you, but were very interested in eating your food, the rodents. Mice and rats were an ever-present problem in ancient Egyptian homes, and their presence wasn't just gross, it was a direct threat to your family's survival. Imagine storing your precious grain, barley, emmer wheat, in clay jars or baskets inside your home. You worked hard all season to grow and harvest it. This is your family's food supply for the year, maybe even seed for the next planting season. Now imagine small, furry creatures gnawing through baskets, squeezing into jars, and helping themselves to your hard-earned provisions. Rodents contaminate food with their droppings and urine, and they eat it, reducing your stock. Every grain they ate was a grain your family wouldn't have. Mice are small, fast, and can get into surprisingly small spaces. Rats are larger, bolder, and can cause more significant damage, gnawing through wood, if you had any furniture, or even softer mud brick to access food stores. They breed quickly, so a few mice quickly turn into an infestation. The telltale signs would be obvious: droppings on the floor, gnawed holes in containers, and the scurrying sounds inside walls or storage areas, especially at night. Trying to sleep while hearing tiny feet scampering across the floor or inside the walls must have been incredibly unsettling. It's the sound of your food disappearing. How did they combat these furry thieves? Trapping was certainly a method. Simple traps could be made from pottery or wood, perhaps baited with a piece of grain or dried fruit. You'd set these traps around your food storage areas and hope to catch the culprits. Success would likely be mixed, as rodents are often wary of new objects. Still, catching even a few would feel like a small victory in an ongoing war. Another method involved physical barriers as much as possible. Storing grain and other food in sturdy, lidded pottery jars or elevated baskets could make it harder for rodents to access. You'd keep your most valuable food items in the most secure containers you had. But pottery could break, baskets could be gnawed through, and ingenious rodents are masters at finding a way in. Putting things up high on shelves might deter mice, but rats are excellent climbers. Cleanliness helped, of course. Sweeping floors regularly and cleaning up spills or dropped crumbs would make your home less attractive as a feeding ground. But perfect cleanliness is impossible in a mud brick home with an earth floor, especially one where food is stored and prepared. There would always be something to attract them. One mainstream historical fact is that the importance of protecting grain stores from pests, especially rodents, is evident in the construction of sophisticated granaries in ancient Egypt, both at the state level and likely on larger estates. These structures often included features designed to deter pests, highlighting the critical nature of this problem. A quirky tidbit, some illustrations in tombs show scenes that might depict hunting or trapping animals, and some believe these could include efforts to catch rodents. It's not as dramatic as hunting hippos, but arguably more important for daily survival. Picturing an ancient Egyptian farmer setting a mousetrap feels very relatable across millennia. Historians still argue about the primary methods used by ordinary Egyptians to combat rodents. Were traps widely used, or were they more reliant on simple measures like keeping food covered and using animals for control? Direct evidence from common homes is scarce, making it difficult to determine the most prevalent strategies beyond those visible in grander structures or implied by context. The health implications of rodent infestations were also significant. Rodents can spread diseases, though the ancient Egyptians wouldn't have understood the link. Contaminated food could cause illness. The constant presence of droppings and urine created an unsanitary environment. It wasn't just about losing food, it was about living in a space compromised by disease vectors. Think about the sounds again. The gnawing at night, the scratching. It's a sound of vulnerability, of your most basic needs being threatened by tiny invaders you can't easily stop. You might bang on the wall to scare them away, but they'd likely just return later. It's a demoralizing struggle. You work tirelessly to produce food, only to have it partially consumed and ruined by pests. The relationship with rodents wasn't entirely hostile, however. Some fringe theories suggest a very limited tolerance might have existed for certain species that primarily ate refuse, but this is purely speculative and hard to reconcile.
Okay, so inside your house is a bit of a free-for-all for small creatures, especially the ones eyeing your pantry. Let's zoom out a bit and think about the truly crucial battleground for pest control, the granary. This wasn't just a cupboard in your house. Granaries were dedicated structures, ranging from simple bins in a farmer's courtyard to massive state-owned facilities holding enough grain to feed thousands. Protecting this stored grain was absolutely vital, not just for individual families, but for the stability of the entire civilization. Why so important? Because grain, primarily barley and emmer wheat, was the foundation of the ancient Egyptian diet. It was used to make bread and beer, the staples consumed daily by everyone from the humblest farmer to the pharaoh. Grain was also a form of currency used to pay workers and taxes. Losing significant amounts of stored grain to pests wasn't just a nuisance, it could lead to hunger, economic hardship, and even social unrest. A well-protected granary was a symbol of security and prosperity. The main enemies of stored grain were, you guessed it, rodents, mice and rats, and various types of beetles and weevils. These insects could infest grain stores in staggering numbers, eating the grain, contaminating it, and generating heat and moisture that could lead to spoilage. A seemingly full granary could be rendered useless or severely depleted by an unchecked insect infestation. So how did they protect these vital stores? Building materials and design were key. Granaries were often built from mud brick, sometimes plastered. Crucially, they were often raised off the ground on stone foundations. Why? To deter rodents and reduce dampness, which could attract insects and cause mold. A raised structure made it harder for rats to simply gnaw their way in from below. Access was typically limited to a single opening at the top for filling and a smaller opening near the bottom for dispensing, both of which could be sealed. These granaries were often conical or dome-shaped on top with a small opening at the peak. You'd climb a ladder to pour grain in. This design might have made it slightly harder for climbing pests, but primarily it allowed for efficient storage and easier sealing of the main entry point. The smaller opening at the bottom allowed grain to be removed as needed, acting a bit like a giant ancient silo. Sealing the granary was paramount. Once filled, the openings would be closed tightly, often sealed with mud or clay. This helped prevent larger pests like rodents from getting in, and also limited airflow, which could potentially slow down insect infestations and reduce moisture. However, perfect sealing was difficult with their technology, and tiny insect eggs or larvae might already be present in the grain itself before storage. Beyond construction, what else did they do? Regular inspection was crucial. Overseers or farmers would need to check the stored grain periodically for signs of infestation. Visible insects, rodent droppings, unusual smells, or heat generated by large numbers of pests. Early detection was key, though knowing what to do once an infestation was discovered was another challenge. One mainstream historical fact is the depiction of conical granaries in tomb paintings, often showing scribes or overseers measuring and recording the grain being added or removed, emphasizing their central role in the Egyptian economy and administration. These visual records confirm the design and importance of these structures. A quirky tidbit, some granaries have been found with ramps built against them or steps leading up, suggesting the arduous process of carrying heavy baskets of grain up to the opening at the top. Imagine doing that all day under the Egyptian sun, knowing that the entire harvest safety depended on getting every last bit stored and sealed away from hungry mouths and mandibles. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of sealing techniques used in ancient Egyptian granaries. While seemingly designed to deter pests, it's debated whether they were truly airtight enough to prevent insect reproduction, or if infestations were a common, accepted loss that had to be managed as best as possible. The level of loss due to pests is difficult to quantify from the archaeological record alone. Protecting state granaries was a massive undertaking, likely involving dedicated personnel responsible for maintenance, inspection, and security. These weren't just storage bins, they were strategic assets. The integrity of the food supply was directly linked to the power and stability of the ruling elite. A pharaoh who couldn't feed his people due to widespread pest damage in granaries would face serious legitimacy issues. For the average farmer, their small granary, or even just large storage jars, represented their family's entire year. The anxiety over protecting it must have been immense.
Okay, so the ancient Egyptians had some structural strategies and manual methods for dealing with pests in their homes and granaries. But sometimes, the best pest control isn't a trap or a sealed jar. It's a furry, four-legged assassin who works for cuddles and a warm spot by the fire, or hearth. Enter the cat. Cats were not native to Egypt. They were domesticated there from African wildcats, and the relationship proved to be incredibly beneficial for both species. For the cat, it was a steady supply of rodents and other small creatures that congregated around human settlements and food stores. For the Egyptians, it was a living, breathing, highly effective pest control system. Imagine your mud brick home, previously a rodent buffet and insect hideout. You bring in a cat. What happens? The mice and rats who were previously quite bold suddenly become much warier. A cat's mere presence, its scent, is a deterrent. And when they do make a move on your grain stores, the cat is there. Swift, silent, and deadly, at least to small mammals. It's a natural predator ideally suited to patrolling the areas where pests congregate. Cats weren't just good at catching rodents, they also preyed on snakes and scorpions, adding another layer of security against dangerous creatures. A cat batting playfully with a scorpion might seem risky, but their agility and speed often gave them the upper paw. This ability to tackle the truly dangerous pests likely endeared them even more to the human population. This practical utility was undoubtedly the foundation of the cat's special status in ancient Egypt.
They weren't just tolerated, they were revered. While the degree of their sacredness evolved over time, they were generally protected and associated with deities like Bastet, the goddess of home, fertility, and protection, often depicted with a cat's head. Harming a cat could result in severe punishment, even death. This level of protection wouldn't have happened if they were just mildly amusing companions. Their value as pest controllers was immense. Keeping cats meant less food lost to rodents, fewer irritating insects. Cats also hunt large insects like beetles and cockroaches, and protection against dangerous bites and stings. It was a win-win relationship. The cat got food and shelter, and the human got a significant reduction in their pest problems, all without having to lift a finger. Well, maybe just to provide some milk or a scrap of fish now and then. Think about the sounds of the night again. Instead of just the scratching of rodents, you'd hear the soft padding of a cat's paws, maybe the thump of it leaping off a shelf, followed by a brief squeak or scurry. The sound of a successful hunt was the sound of your food supply being defended. It must have been incredibly reassuring. Cats weren't just kept by the wealthy. Evidence suggests they were common in ordinary households, indicating their practical value was recognized across social strata. A farmer, a weaver, a fisherman, anyone with stored food would benefit from having a cat or two around. One mainstream historical fact is the clear evidence from art and archaeology of the cat's presence and veneration in ancient Egypt, including burials of mummified cats and depictions in domestic scenes, underscoring their importance in Egyptian life and beliefs. A quirky tidbit: the word Mao in Egyptian likely refers to the cat, perhaps onomatopoeic, sounding like a cat's meow. It's a small detail, but charmingly direct, suggesting a close familiarity and affection for these animals. Historians still argue about the exact timeline and extent of cat domestication in Egypt. While it's widely accepted that it happened there and that they were kept for pest control, pinning down the earliest instances and the precise reasons for their rapid adoption compared to other cultures is still a subject of scholarly debate. Was it purely practical initially, with religious significance developing later? Or did some degree of respect or sacredness exist from the start due to their association with protection? Imagine working all day, coming home, and seeing your cat sitting proudly beside a deceased mouse near the granary jars. That feeling of gratitude for the pest control service provided freely by your feline friend must have been immense. They were silent guardians, tireless hunters operating while you slept. The religious dimension also provided a framework for their protection. If a cat was associated with a goddess of the home, then caring for that cat was not just practical, it was a pious act that brought good fortune and protection to the household. This intertwining of utility and spirituality is characteristic of ancient Egyptian culture. In essence, the Egyptians outsourced a significant portion of their pest control problem to a highly efficient natural solution. They provided shelter and maybe a little supplemental food, and the cats provided vigilant 24/7 protection against some of the most damaging and dangerous pests.
Okay, so cats were the undisputed champions of ancient Egyptian pest control, particularly against rodents and some larger threats. But were they the only animal helpers? Let's think about what other creatures might have lent a paw, claw, or beak to the ongoing war against pests. Dogs were certainly present in ancient Egypt. They were used for hunting, guarding, and companionship. While a dog isn't typically going to chase down every cockroach or mosquito, certain breeds might have been effective at keeping larger pests like rats at bay. A good terrier-type dog, known for its ratting abilities, could have been a valuable asset in a courtyard or around storage areas. They might not have been as silent or stealthy as cats, but their presence and willingness to confront larger rodents could have complemented the feline efforts. Imagine a dog barking at a rat near the granary entrance, not quiet, but effective in deterring the pest. Beyond domestic animals, the Egyptians also interacted closely with wildlife. Certain birds are natural predators of insects and rodents. Falcons and hawks, while often depicted in religious contexts, are efficient hunters.
Would they have encouraged certain bird species to nest nearby or visit areas to help control pests? Perhaps. Encouraging barn owls, for instance, which are prolific rodent hunters, around granaries could have been a natural form of pest control, whether intentionally encouraged or simply a recognized benefit of their presence. Mongooses are another possibility. These nimble mammals are famous for their ability to kill snakes, but they also prey on rodents, insects, and scorpions. They were known to the ancient Egyptians. Depictions of mongooses exist, sometimes interacting with snakes in a way that suggests their protective abilities were recognized. Could they have been semi-domesticated or encouraged around homes and farms to help keep down the populations of various pests, including those dangerous scorpions? It's plausible. A mongoose might not curl up on your lap like a cat, but it would certainly earn its keep by clearing out some unwelcome guests. Even something as simple as a duck or goose kept in a courtyard could help control insect populations. Ducks are voracious eaters of slugs, snails, and various insects. Letting them forage in certain areas could have helped reduce garden pests or insect populations around the home. Think about the farm environment. Fields would be full of insects, grasshoppers, beetles, caterpillars. Livestock would attract flies. Encouraging natural predators within the ecosystem was a passive form of pest control. Herons and other wading birds in the fields near the Nile might have eaten insect larvae or amphibians. Small lizards and geckos are natural predators of insects and spiders, and would have been common inhabitants of mud brick structures. While not kept in the same way as cats or dogs, their presence was beneficial. One mainstream historical fact is the domestication of dogs and their use in various roles, including hunting and guarding, as widely depicted in Egyptian art and mentioned in texts. While their primary role might not have been seen purely as pest control, rodent catching was a natural extension of their predatory instincts. A quirky tidbit, some tomb scenes show baboons being trained to pick fruit. While this is a different task, it shows the Egyptians' interest in utilizing the natural abilities of animals for various purposes. Could they have attempted to utilize other animals for pest control in ways we don't fully understand or have lost the evidence for? It's fun to imagine a trained baboon on scorpion patrol. Historians still argue about the extent to which ancient Egyptians deliberately used or encouraged animals other than cats specifically for pest control in their homes or granaries, compared to simply benefiting opportunistically from their natural predatory behavior. Was the presence of a mongoose or an owl around the farm actively facilitated, or was it just a happy side effect of the environment? The line between accidental benefit and intentional strategy can be blurry in the archaeological record. Imagine the sounds of your animal helpers, the soft purr and occasional yowl of the cat, maybe the deeper growl of a dog alerting you to something larger, the quiet rustle of a mongoose hunting in the shadows. These sounds would have been reassuring, signaling that your home and food stores were being protected by a natural, living defense system. This reliance on animal helpers highlights a fundamentally different approach to pest management than our modern one. Instead of chemicals and barriers designed to eliminate pests entirely, often with unintended environmental consequences, the Egyptians integrated natural predators into their living spaces. It was a more symbiotic, albeit sometimes messy, relationship with the animal world. You lived alongside your pest controllers, acknowledging their valuable service. While cats were clearly the stars of this show, it's fascinating to consider the supporting cast. The loyal dog keeping rats out of the courtyard, the quiet mongoose patrolling for scorpions.
Okay, so animals were a big help, particularly the beloved cat. But the design of the buildings themselves also played a role, for better or worse, in the ancient Egyptian battle against pests. Their homes were primarily constructed from mud brick, made from the readily available silt of the Nile mixed with straw and dried in the sun. This was an excellent material for the climate. It insulated well against the intense heat of the day and retained warmth at night. But it wasn't exactly impenetrable. Mud brick walls, especially if not well plastered, are porous. They can develop cracks as they dry or settle, or due to environmental factors.
These cracks, no matter how small, are perfect highways and hiding spots for insects like ants, cockroaches, spiders, and even smaller rodents. You might sweep the floor meticulously, but pests could simply retreat into the walls themselves, emerging later. It was like living in a structure that was part home, part giant insect hotel. The roofs, as we touched upon earlier, were often constructed from palm logs or bundles of reeds covered with a layer of mud. This provided shade and some protection from rare rain, but it was also an ideal habitat for insects, spiders, and even scorpions seeking shelter. Birds or rodents might nest in the roof structure. You could literally have pests living above you, occasionally dropping down to say hello or bite you. Flooring was typically packed earth, sometimes covered with reed mats. This surface was relatively easy to maintain by sweeping, but it offered no barrier to pests that burrowed or scurried close to the ground. Insects could live in the soil floor itself, emerging as they pleased. Mats provided a slightly cleaner surface, but could also harbor bedbugs, fleas, and other parasites. Windows, if they existed, especially in simpler homes, were usually just openings or covered with lattices made of wood or reeds. Glass windows, and certainly insect screens, were non-existent. This meant that flying insects, mosquitoes, flies, gnats had unimpeded access to the inside of the home whenever they wished. You couldn't seal yourself off from the buzzing hordes. The layout of Egyptian homes often included courtyards, which were essential for light, ventilation, and daily activities like cooking and weaving. However, open courtyards meant direct exposure to the elements and pests. While animals like cats and dogs might patrol the courtyard, it was still a battleground shared with the outside world. Better-built homes, particularly those of the wealthy or important institutions like temples and palaces, might have featured thicker, more carefully constructed and plastered walls, raised floors, and perhaps better sealed doors. This would have offered a degree of increased protection, but probably didn't eliminate the problem entirely. Even stone structures, like temples and tombs, have their share of resident bats, insects, and rodents who find ways in. One mainstream historical fact about ancient Egyptian architecture is the widespread use of mud brick for domestic buildings across all social classes, demonstrating its practicality, but also the inherent challenges it posed for creating truly pest-free environments. A quirky tidbit, some elaborate burials include miniature models of houses or estates, offering glimpses into the potential layout and structure of ancient homes. Examining these models can sometimes reveal details about doors, windows, and courtyard arrangements that shed light on how people lived and interacted with their environment, including the presence of animals like those all-important cats. Historians still argue about the extent to which variations in building techniques and materials across different periods and social classes impacted the severity of pest problems in ancient Egyptian homes. While mud brick was standard, did improvements in plastering, foundation techniques, or sealing make a significant difference in wealthy households compared to poorer ones? The evidence is often interpretive. Think about the constant maintenance required. Cracks in mud brick would need to be repaired. Roof coverings would need replacing or patching. Keeping the structural integrity intact was not just about keeping the house standing, it was also a line of defense against pests. It adds another chore to the already busy life of an ancient Egyptian homeowner. Even basic construction choices had consequences. Storing grain within or immediately adjacent to living spaces, common in simpler homes, made those areas prime targets for rodents and grain beetles. Larger estates and state facilities often had separate, more robust granaries, reflecting an understanding that isolating food stores was a key pest control strategy. Ultimately, ancient Egyptian architecture, while adapted to the climate and utilizing readily available materials, presented inherent challenges for pest control. The porous nature of mud brick, the vulnerability of roof structures, and the lack of effective sealing techniques.
So we've looked at the average mud brick home and the challenges within. Now let's think bigger. What about the grand structures, the temples, the palaces, the tombs? Surely these imposing stone buildings were immune to the tiny invaders, right? Unfortunately, no. While stone walls and elevated structures offered some advantages, pests were just as determined to inhabit and exploit these important buildings, presenting a different scale of challenge. Temples and palaces were vast complexes, containing not just living quarters for priests or royalty, but also storerooms for offerings and supplies, workshops, and ceremonial areas. These areas contained valuable goods, food offerings, textiles, papyrus scrolls, precious woods, and other materials that could attract pests. A large temple granary, for example, would be a prime target for rodents and grain beetles, just like a farmer's bin, but on a massive scale. Stone structures offered better protection against rodents gnawing their way in, but they still had entry points, doors, high windows, air vents. And stone, while solid, can have gaps or crevices, especially in less finely fitted areas. Bats, for instance, famously inhabit ancient stone structures, finding roosting spots in high ceilings and narrow gaps. Their presence, while maybe not as destructive as rodents, still contributes to unsanitary conditions with their droppings. Insects still found ways in. Flies and mosquitoes could fly through open doorways or windows. Beetles and cockroaches could scurry across floors and walls, seeking food sources or damp areas. Storage rooms filled with textiles or papyrus would be attractive to moths and other damaging insects. Pests didn't care about the sacredness of a space or the wealth of its inhabitants. They cared about food, water, and shelter. Maintaining cleanliness and preventing infestations in such large buildings would have required significant effort and organization. There would have been servants, priests, or specialized staff responsible for cleaning, sweeping, and inspecting storage areas. Imagine the sheer scale of sweeping the vast courtyards and halls of Karnak Temple, constantly trying to keep ahead of the dust and debris that could shelter pests. Tombs, while perhaps less focused on daily pest issues once sealed, faced their own challenges, particularly during the construction and decoration phases and afterward from creatures seeking shelter. Insects like termites could potentially damage wooden structures within the tomb, like sarcophagi or furniture. Bats and rodents could find ways into burial chambers, disturbing the resting place and potentially damaging goods left for the afterlife. Protecting the tomb and its contents from such intrusion was part of ensuring the deceased's peaceful transition. One mainstream historical fact is the existence of elaborate storerooms within temple complexes, designed to hold vast quantities of grain, oil, wine, and other goods offered to the gods and used to support the temple personnel. The sheer volume of these stores underscores the potential for massive pest infestations if not managed effectively. A quirky tidbit, some tomb art depicts servants cleaning or performing duties that might include pest control tasks, even in death. It's a testament to how pervasive the issue was that even in preparations for the afterlife, keeping things clean and pest-free seemed important. Historians still argue about the extent to which specialized roles or professions existed specifically for hygiene and pest management within large institutions like temples and palaces. While there were overseers and administrators, were there dedicated pest control officers? Evidence is indirect, relying on job titles that might encompass such duties, making it hard to definitively identify ancient exterminators. Think about the sheer volume of resources at risk. The grain in a spate granary, the valuable papyrus scrolls in a temple library, the fine linen stored in a palace, all susceptible to damage by pests. The measures taken in these grand buildings might have been more sophisticated, perhaps better seals, more organized cleaning routines, more personnel dedicated to monitoring. But the fundamental challenge remained. Even symbolic or decorative elements could be affected. Insect damage to temple paintings or hieroglyphs, if not prevented or repaired, would be a form of degradation. Protecting the physical integrity of these structures and their contents from pests was an ongoing process, demanding constant vigilance. While the average person worried about a mouse in their green jar, the temple administrators worried about rodents and beetles potentially compromising the offerings to the gods or the food supply for hundreds of priests. The scale was different, the potential consequences arguably larger in terms of societal impact, a famine versus a ruined family meal, but the core battle.
Okay, we've explored the structures and the animals used for pest control. Now let's turn our attention to what the ancient Egyptians might have used from the plant world. Did they harness the power of nature's own chemicals, botanical repellents, to ward off unwanted visitors? Evidence suggests they absolutely did. The Egyptians were skilled herbalists with a deep knowledge of local flora. They used plants for food, medicine, cosmetics, and religious purposes. It makes perfect sense that they would also discover and utilize plants with properties that deterred insects or other pests. Imagine crushing certain leaves or stems and rubbing the paste on your skin to keep biting flies away. Or perhaps scattering dried herbs in storage areas to deter grain pests. These practices are common in traditional societies worldwide, and there's reason to believe the Egyptians employed similar methods. We know they used fragrant oils and perfumes derived from plants like lotus, myrrh, and frankincense. While primarily for personal adornment or religious rites, some of these substances, particularly resins and certain plant extracts, can have insecticidal or repellent properties. Remember those melting fat cones people wore? If they were infused with certain strong-smelling plant resins, they might have offered a personal bug shield, however rudimentary. Specific plants are also known to have pest-repelling qualities. For example, certain types of mint or wormwood are natural insect deterrents. Were these plants grown deliberately near homes or scattered in storage areas? It's highly probable. You might hang bundles of pungent herbs near doorways or windows, hoping the smell would discourage flying insects from entering. Garlic and onions, common in the Egyptian diet, are also known to have properties that can deter some insects. While primarily used in cooking, perhaps the strong smell associated with preparing and eating them offered some incidental protection. Imagine sitting down to a meal of bread and onions. The flies might think twice before joining you. For grain storage, dried plant materials with insecticidal properties could be mixed in with the grain or layered within the storage bins. Certain plant ash or even fine sand could also be used to physically damage insect exoskeletons or disrupt their breathing, though this is more about mechanical action than chemical repellency. One mainstream historical fact is the extensive use of various plants for medicinal and cosmetic purposes, documented in papyri like the Ebers papyrus. This demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of plant properties, making it highly likely they applied this knowledge to other practical problems like pest control. A quirky tidbit, some tomb paintings show Egyptians using incense and fragrant oils, not just in religious ceremonies, but also in domestic settings. While the primary purpose might have been purification or creating a pleasant aroma, some of these substances, derived from resins, have known insect repellent properties. Perhaps that pleasant smell was also a subtle form of pest management. Historians still argue about the specific plant species deliberately used by ancient Egyptians specifically for pest control, as opposed to those whose repellent properties were a secondary benefit. While we know they used many plants, precisely identifying their historical insecticides or repellents from the texts and archaeological remains alone requires interpretation and often relies on comparing with modern ethnographic data from similar regions. Think about the knowledge passed down through generations. Which plants did grandmothers scatter in the corners of the house? Which herbs did the farmers put in their grain bins? This wasn't just scientific knowledge, it was practical folk wisdom developed through centuries of living closely with nature and its challenges. The effectiveness of these botanical methods would have varied. They weren't magic bullets like modern chemical pesticides, but they offered a low-cost, readily available way to mitigate pest problems. Using strongly scented plants might not kill pests, but it could make an area less attractive, diverting them elsewhere. It was about creating a less appealing environment for the invaders. This approach reflects a deep connection to the natural world and a pragmatic use of available resources. You didn't need to synthesize complex chemicals. You just needed to know which plants had the right properties and how to use them. It was a continuous experiment, refined over centuries, finding which smells, textures, or components of plants offered the best defense against the relentless insect and rodent populations. Trying to get a good night's sleep? Maybe scattering some strong-smelling herbs around your sleeping mat offered a little extra peace of mind, even if it didn't eliminate every single bug. Every little bit of plant power helped in the ongoing war against pests.
All right, beyond plants and animals and structural design, did the ancient Egyptians dabble in anything approaching chemical warfare against pests? While they didn't have modern synthetic pesticides, they did utilize various naturally occurring substances and compounds for a multitude of purposes. It's worth exploring if any of these were turned against their tiny enemies. One prominent substance in ancient Egypt was natron. This naturally occurring salt mixture, primarily sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, was found in abundance in places like the Wadi Natron. It was famously used in the mummification process due to its drying properties, which help preserve bodies. But natron also has antiseptic and drying qualities that could potentially be detrimental to insects. Scattering powdered natron in areas where insects congregated could dehydrate them or make the environment inhospitable. Imagine dusting corners or crevices with a fine powder, hoping it would deter crawling insects. Another substance they were familiar with was bitumen or asphalt, which sometimes seeped up from the ground in certain areas. Bitumen was used as a sealant for waterproofing boats and baskets and even in mummification. Its sticky, tar-like nature could certainly trap insects, and its composition might be toxic to some creatures. Sealing cracks in walls or floors with bitumen could act as both a physical barrier and potentially a chemical deterrent. Oils, beyond their potential as botanical repellents, could also be used. Thick, viscous oils might suffocate small insects or larvae. Applying a layer of oil to a surface could make it difficult for crawling pests to traverse. This would be particularly useful on the rims of storage jars or around potential entry points. Certain minerals and earths might also have been used. Fine dusts or powders like ash or specific types of clay can disrupt insect respiratory systems or physically damage their exoskeletons, a method known as desiccant dust. While not a chemical reaction in the traditional sense, it's using a substance's physical properties to kill pests. Scattering fine ash or sand around could help against crawling insects like ants or beetles. We also know they worked with metals and minerals in various forms. While less likely for widespread domestic pest control, perhaps some metallic compounds or mineral salts were used in very specific contexts, though evidence for this in pest control is sparse. One mainstream historical fact is the extensive use of natron in ancient Egyptian life, from mummification and cleaning to potentially medicinal applications, highlighting their familiarity with its properties. Its availability and multiple uses make it a plausible candidate for experimentation in pest control. A quirky tidbit, the Egyptians developed sophisticated processes for extracting oils and resins from plants and minerals. The knowledge gained from these processes might have led them to discover which substances had adverse effects on insects or other pests, even if the primary purpose was perfume or medicine. It's like a happy, albeit toxic, accident. Historians still argue about the intentionality and effectiveness of using substances like natron or bitumen specifically for pest control in everyday life. Were these substances used primarily for these purposes, or was any pest deterrence a side effect of their use for other functions, like sealing or cleaning? The texts don't often explicitly state, "Use this to kill bugs," making interpretation challenging. Think about the risks involved in using some of these substances. Handling bitumen could be messy and potentially hazardous. Natron is an irritant. Their understanding of safety precautions would have been limited. You might be trying to get rid of pests but creating other problems for yourself. This use of natural substances shows a practical trial-and-error approach to dealing with environmental challenges. They observed what worked, what seemed to deter pests, and incorporated into their practices. It wasn't a centralized scientific program, but rather accumulated knowledge passed down and adapted. While not having the potent chemical arsenal of the modern world, the ancient Egyptians used the materials available to them, salts, tars, oils, mineral dusts, to create barriers, deterrents, and possibly even simple toxins targeting pests. These chemical solutions, combined with physical methods, botanical repellents, and animal helpers, formed a multi-pronged approach to the never-ending struggle. Trying to get a good night's sleep? Maybe sprinkling a bit of natron around your mat gave you some peace of mind. Even if the pests were just slightly less enthusiastic about sharing your space. It was a tangible action, a form of control in a world where control over nature was often elusive.
So far, we've discussed practical, physical, biological, and even early chemical methods the ancient Egyptians used to fight pests. But living in a world where so much was beyond their direct control, the flooding of the Nile, the scorching sun, and yes, the relentless invasions of tiny creatures, it's natural that they would also turn to the realm of magic and the divine for help. When traps failed and botanical smells weren't enough, perhaps the gods or specific magical rituals could offer protection. Magic, Heka, was an integral part of ancient Egyptian life, interwoven with religion, medicine, and everyday practice. It wasn't seen as separate from reality, but as a force that could influence events and offer protection. So, if pests were a constant threat to your health, comfort, and food supply, it makes sense that you would seek magical means to repel them. As mentioned earlier, deities were associated with different aspects of life, including protection from dangers. Serket, the scorpion goddess, while embodying the danger of scorpions, was also invoked for protection and healing from their stings. Appealing to Serket through prayers, offerings, or amulets was a way to seek divine intervention against this specific, deadly pest. You might wear an amulet with her image, hoping it would ward off scorpions while you slept. Other deities associated with protection, health, or the home might also be invoked. Bastet, the cat goddess, was clearly linked to the creature that was the best defense against rodents. Praying to Bastet could be seen as reinforcing the protective power of your resident feline pest controllers. Magical spells and rituals were also recorded in papyri. Some of these spells were intended to ward off dangerous animals, like snakes and scorpions, often involving incantations, the use of specific objects, or drawing protective symbols. While these might seem like superstitions to modern minds, to the Egyptians they were active attempts to influence the unseen forces that allowed pests to cause harm. Imagine reciting a spell before going to bed, hoping it would create an invisible barrier around your home, deterring any unwelcome creatures from entering. Amulets were widely used, small charms worn or placed in the home for protection. Amulets in the shape of scorpions or snakes could be used to represent the creature being controlled or appeased. Other protective symbols, like the Eye of Horus or the Ankh, could also be employed with the general intention of warding off evil or danger, which would certainly include things that bite, sting, or steal your food. One mainstream historical fact is the widespread use of amulets and spells for protection against various dangers, including venomous animals, as evidenced by surviving artifacts, tomb decorations, and magical papyri. This shows that supernatural defenses were considered a valid approach. A quirky tidbit, some spells against pests involved rather specific instructions, like drawing a picture of the offending creature and symbolically destroying it, or writing a name on a piece of papyrus and burning it. The intention was to gain power over the pest through ritual action. Trying to magically banish a cockroach infestation feels both desperate and strangely formal. Historians still argue about the primary role of magic in ancient Egyptian pest control. Was it considered the most effective method, a supplement to practical measures, or primarily a psychological tool to provide comfort and a sense of agency in a world full of uncontrollable threats? It's likely a combination, but the emphasis placed on magical artifacts and texts suggests it wasn't merely a trivial practice. Think about the psychological comfort these practices would provide. Facing constant infestations and the risk of dangerous bites, relying solely on mud walls and whisking flies must have felt insufficient. Turning to the divine and the magical offered another layer of defense, a hope that forces beyond the physical world could offer aid. It provided a sense of control and reassurance in the face of unpredictable dangers. Priests and scribes often held specialized knowledge of magical texts and rituals. People might go to them for protective spells or amulets. This suggests a recognized need for such services within the community. Dealing with a severe infestation or the aftermath of a dangerous bite might involve seeking help from someone skilled in magical healing or protection. The integration of practical and magical approaches is characteristic of ancient Egypt. You'd build your granary well, keep cats, and place protective amulets around it. You'd treat a scorpion sting with poultices and recite a spell invoking circuit. They didn't necessarily see these as contradictory, but as different facets of influencing the world around them. Ultimately, while physical and biological methods tackled the tangible aspects of the pest problem, magic and divine aid addressed the fear, uncertainty, and perceived supernatural elements of these threats. It offered a means of seeking protection when human efforts felt insufficient. Trying to get a good night's sleep in ancient Egypt meant hoping your practical measures worked, your cat was on duty, and that the deities were looking favorably.
The constant and pervasive nature of pests in ancient Egypt, it's reasonable to wonder if anyone specialized in dealing with them. Did professional pest fighters exist? While there might not have been a guild of exterminators are us, there's evidence suggesting that certain roles and individuals would have been more involved in hygiene, sanitation, and the removal of pests than the average person. It's highly likely that dedicated staff were responsible for maintenance, cleaning, and guarding against pests in these environments. It's highly likely that dedicated staff were responsible for maintenance, cleaning, and guarding against pests in these environments. We know there were various levels of servants and laborers in these large households and institutions. Among their duties would have been cleaning, sweeping floors, clearing waste, tidying storage areas. These basic hygiene practices are fundamental to pest control, reducing food sources and hiding places. A servant tasked with keeping the palace storerooms clean was, in effect, a frontline pest fighter. Beyond general cleaning, some roles might have involved more specific tasks. Overseers of granaries would certainly be responsible for monitoring the grain for infestations and taking measures to protect it. This would require knowledge of storage techniques, sealing, and perhaps identifying signs of pest damage. While not solely a pest control role, it was a significant part of the job. In wealthier households, employing staff whose duties included keeping the house clean and orderly would indirectly contribute to pest control. A servant who regularly swept, dusted, and organized would make the home less attractive to pests compared to a neglected dwelling. There might also have been individuals known for specific skills, like trapping rodents or safely dealing with snakes and scorpions. While not a full-time profession, someone might gain a reputation for being particularly good at catching mice or removing a scorpion from a room and be called upon when needed. This is less about a dedicated profession and more about valuable practical skills recognized within a community. Medical practitioners, too, would have dealt with the consequences of pest issues, treating insect bites, scorpion stings, and illnesses potentially spread by rodents or insects. Their knowledge of remedies and treatments, while not preventative pest control, was part of the overall human response to the problem. One mainstream historical fact is the complex organizational structure of large Egyptian institutions, involving specialized roles for managing resources, labor, and maintenance. implying that tasks related to hygiene and storage protection were assigned to specific individuals or groups. A quirky tidbit, some ancient Egyptian texts mention various occupations, and while there isn't a hieroglyph that directly translates to exterminator, titles related to overseers of stores, cleaning staff, or animal handlers, like those caring for cats, might encompass pest management duties within their broader responsibilities. Historians still argue about the degree of specialization in ancient Egyptian labor. Were there individuals whose primary job, or at least a significant part of it, was focused on pest control, perhaps moving between different locations as needed? Or were these tasks simply integrated into the roles of general servants, overseers, or animal keepers? The lack of explicit job titles makes it challenging to draw firm conclusions. Think about the scale of the problem in a large city like Memphis or Thebes. With dense populations, markets, and storage areas, hygiene and pest control would be a constant challenge. It seems plausible that some level of organized effort, perhaps overseen by local officials responsible for sanitation, would have been necessary to manage public health risks associated with pests. The construction and sealing of tombs, particularly royal ones, also required careful work to protect the valuable contents from looters and environmental damage, which included damage from pests like termites or rodents. The craftsmen and overseers involved in this work would have needed knowledge of materials and techniques to deter such intruders. While we might not find clear job descriptions for chief rodent officer or head mosquito swatter, the necessity of dealing with pests in all areas of life, from the humble home to the grandest temple, meant that these tasks were performed by someone. Whether through general labor, specialized oversight, or recognized individual skills, the ongoing battle against pests relied on human effort and organization alongside the help of animals and the use of available materials and beliefs. Getting a good night's sleep in ancient Egypt meant trusting that the people responsible for maintaining your environment, whether they were servants, overseers, or just your own vigilant family members, were doing their job to keep the tiny invaders at bay.
So, after exploring all these different angles, the relentless pests, the mud brick homes, the strategic granaries, the essential cats, the helpful other animals, the architectural defenses, the botanical and chemical tools, and the role of magic and people, one thing becomes abundantly clear. The battle against pests in ancient Egypt was a never-ending war. It wasn't a problem they solved, it was a challenge they managed, day in and day out, for millennia. Let the cumulative effort across the entire civilization, across its vast history. Every generation faced the same buzzing, biting, scuttling enemies. Every homeowner, every farmer, every temple administrator, every palace servant played a role in this ongoing struggle. It was a constant drain on resources, time, and energy. Lost food, damaged goods, illness, discomfort, fear. The costs of pest infestations were significant. Despite their ingenuity, the design of granaries, the unique partnership with cats, the use of natural substances, they never achieved complete victory. The environment of the Nile Valley, so conducive to life, was simply too perfect a breeding ground for pests of all kinds. The annual flood, while vital, exacerbated the problem by creating large areas of standing water. The climate was warm and humid for much of the year, ideal for insect reproduction. Their methods were often reactive rather than purely preventative. You dealt with an infestation once it was discovered. You swatted the flies that were already there. You set a trap for the rodent you heard in the walls. While some measures were preventative, like building granaries on raised foundations or sealing jars, perfect prevention was beyond their technological capabilities. The constant presence of pests influenced daily routines, building practices, hygiene habits, and even religious beliefs. It was a fundamental aspect of the ancient Egyptian experience, a shared reality across all levels of society. You learned to live with a certain level of discomfort and vigilance. Reflecting on their struggle makes us appreciate the relative ease of our modern lives, where screens on windows and readily available insecticides make indoor pest infestations much less of a daily battle for most people in many parts of the world. We've outsourced our war with pests to chemical companies and professional services, often forgetting the historical reality of constant physical coexistence. One mainstream historical fact that encapsulates this is the sheer continuity of these pest issues throughout the vast span of ancient Egyptian history. Evidence of their struggles, from texts mentioning insect plagues to archaeological finds of traps and protective amulets, spans thousands of years, showing this wasn't a temporary problem but a persistent environmental challenge. A quirky tidbit to leave you with: even in the afterlife, as depicted in tomb scenes showing the deceased in a perfect idealized version of their life, sometimes you still see depictions of agricultural tasks like harvesting grain, implying that the cycle of work, and perhaps even the need for vigilance, though hopefully not pest control itself in the afterlife, was a deeply ingrained part of their worldview. Historians still argue about the overall impact of pests on ancient Egyptian society. While clearly a problem, how much did they affect population health, agricultural output, or economic stability on a macro level? Quantifying these impacts definitively is difficult, leaving the precise severity open to scholarly debate. But the micro-level evidence from daily life is compelling. The story of ancient Egyptian pest control isn't just about clever techniques. It's about human resilience and adaptation in the face of persistent environmental challenges. It's about living in a world teeming with life, both beneficial and detrimental, and finding ways to survive and thrive despite the constant irritations and dangers posed by the smallest of creatures. They developed a practical, integrated system relying on architecture, animals, plants, simple chemicals, and even magic to make their lives more bearable. And as you drift off now, let the echoes of that ancient world fade. The warm air, the rustle of reeds, the distant call of a bird. And maybe, just maybe, you can imagine the soft purr of a cat on patrol, a silent guardian keeping watch over the sleeping household, a testament to one of the most successful and enduring forms of pest control in